Hi, welcome to the Avon Book Festival. I'm Fiona Gibson. I'm an author of romantic comedy novels, and we also have Lorna Cook, a fellow author, and Sue Moorcroft. And we will be chatting about writing, and we'll be taking your questions. So I will just give us a few minutes for everyone to kind of get ready, and please message us, make us look very popular for our publishers. So we'll just take a couple of minutes, okay?
I can see somebody's asking a question, but I haven't got my glasses.
Okay.
Hello, Samantha Smith.
Oh yes, hello Samantha.
Okay. And everyone can see everyone okay and everything. So I think we're ready to go. So we're all writing in some ways we're used to working at home, aren't we? We have a very isolated job, although obviously the current climate puts a kind of level of weirdness on what we're doing. But hopefully everybody is managing to write and be productive. So I thought we'd start off by just talking a bit about how you both got into writing way back in the beginning. I know, Lorna, your second novel was published recently, The Forbidden Secret.
Forbidden Promise, yes.
Forbidden Promise.
It's all right. All the titles are interchangeable between
The Forbidden Promise was out very recently and is doing really well. So that's your second novel, is that right?
Yeah, it's my second.
So how did you start?
I came into it, I suppose, I haven't been writing very long fiction. I've been writing sort of magazine articles and things a lot before that, and then I went into PR. And I just had, I think I fell into it because I was scavenging on the internet for fun, weird stories, you know, like you fall down the Daily Mail sidebar of shame, like one day you're clicking on a story of Kim Kardashian and the next you're on forgotten villages in Dorset in the war. And so that's kind of how I got led into writing, because I just found this amazing story about Tyneham that I didn't think had ever been covered before, and put together a strange story around that really in my head, and decided one day just that I would write it down. So that's kind of how I started.
So it was quite accidental, really.
Yeah, I think so. I had written a book before it, but it never went anywhere. I never showed it to anybody. So by the time I had found the story about Tyneham, I was quite into the idea of writing a novel. So quite accidental, but
so that was something you definitely wanted to do.
Yeah. I didn't know I wanted to write a book until I did it. I had never had visions of wanting to be a novelist. I was quite happy writing writing magazine stories, really. So no, in the end I just sort of went for it.
Yeah, you dived in.
I did dive in at the deep end.
And what about you, Sue? How did you start?
Well, I'm one of these people who took 20 years to be an overnight success. So right from school, I wanted to be an author. I thought about journalism and had a couple of opportunities that I squandered. And now I'm not unhappy about that. But when my children were very small and I was a stay-home mum, I decided, right, now is the time where I will find time for myself. When the youngest went to playgroup, so I had these 2-hour sessions a week where nobody could expect me to get a job outside the home or anything. So I decided that I was going to write. And I wrote 2 novels. And I really understand people who say they don't write for publication. They write for the pleasure of it, because I've never enjoyed writing anything more, but I've never written anything worse.
Really?
They are in a landfill somewhere, and it's the best place for them. But at the same sort of time, somebody gave me a handbook by the late Nancy Smith, and it suggested that if you didn't have an agent, and if you didn't have a celebrity status or any of the things that are quite helpful, then you might like to try writing short stories for magazines. And perhaps by the time you've got 20 published, a publisher would say, yes, you've got an audience, you've passed quality control with these other editors. And loosely speaking, it worked. But it was 87 short stories serial before I sold a novel. Yeah.
Magazines, yeah, women's magazines.
Yeah, mainly women. There's a few that were anyway around that were sort of genderless, like Ireland's Own and Yours and the Weekly News, for instance. And every magazine has a different sort of philosophy and ethos and readership. And so it teaches you quite a lot, and you get some brutal feedback. Like, we'll look at this again if you make it half as long and twice as funny.
Oh no!
Yeah, I know, it's what I said.
But it's like an apprenticeship, isn't it? I've done quite a lot of magazine short stories as well, and it's although it's very different writing a short story that's maybe 2,000 words to a novel that's 100,000. You've still got to have a good plot. You've got to keep drag the reader along with you, haven't you?
Yeah.
And have a good ending and good characters. And it's kind of in miniature. Yeah. I actually still really like writing them because it's so nice to do something short, isn't it?
I still prefer novels though. I still prefer writing novels. I do write a few short stories a year, mainly for promo. But now I find them like, I've got to have another idea? With novels, I only have to have 2 a year.
Do you ever find that a novel grows out of a short story?
Not really.
No,
not for me. I think my short story structure is so in my head as conflict, and the turning point that comes via the central character, who therefore finds the solution. That I think I only squander little ideas on short stories and save the bigger ideas for the novels.
Right. Yes. I think sometimes I've tested out an area of fiction in a short story. I've given something a little kind of test run.
Yeah.
But going on to this whole issue of setting of your novels, both the settings are really obviously a big part of both of your stories. Lorna, yours is set in Scotland, and that's a real integral part of the plot and the story. And Sue, yours is in Malta. Your newest one, which is out at the end of April, isn't it? Is that right?
Yeah. Do you like it?
I love it.
This is one I made earlier because the paperbacks aren't printed yet, and so I've printed a cover myself and put it around someone else.
It works.
Well, it's beautifully sunny and uplifting and warm, like your fiction is. Could you tell us a bit about the Malta setting and what the place means to you? Well,
it means an enormous amount to me because I was brought up there for several years as an army kid. And so by the time I came to live in London at 8.5, Malta was home. I'd been there for nearly 5 of my 8.5 years, and I'd been in Cyprus for 2 of the others. And I didn't like London one little bit. It was January and it was horrible. So I do send myself back there either in reality or in my books and short stories quite often. And my brothers and my sister-in-law and I went to Malta in October 2018 for a service kids reunion. She's an RAF kid. And we managed to make one reunion lunch into a 10-day holiday.
Oh, wow.
So I then proceeded to make one reunion lunch into an entire novel.
Oh, fantastic.
And the army is the unifying factor. Slightly unusually for me, I've got 3 generations in the book, although not all of them have a viewpoint or even come on stage, but it was important to know who was who. So the grandparents were like my dad and my mum for that matter in the army, and then you get the army kids who are my kind of age, and then the hero and heroine are the children of those people. And so that's the unifying factor, that my heroine's mum and so Rosa's mum Dorian and Zach's dad, Steve, went to school together in Teenie Barracks, which is exactly where I went to school, surprisingly enough. And so I've sent Dory up. I've sent myself up a little bit in Dory. And she can see nothing wrong with Malta. As soon as she gets the opportunity to spend the summer there, she's off, like Flynn. And she won't hear a word against it. Whereas her daughter has been brought up in one town. and finds it all very alien and strange, and isn't at all sure to start off with that she likes it, but then she does. So it only takes her a week or so and she's in love with the island as well. And Zach, I gave a Maltese grandmother. Nana is, she married a soldier basically, which did happen. Not as much as you'd probably expect, because I don't think the Maltese particularly encouraged it, and I know the British Army didn't particularly encourage it. But that it did happen, and so I've made him partly Maltese, and he's got the sort of the very shiny black hair and the golden skin, and he's gone there to kind of find his roots, really.
Right, yeah. Isn't it lovely to have that control where you can just, you know, it's rooted in a place that you obviously know really, really well.
Yes. Yeah.
And you can use that setting for your own sort of means and ends, really.
Yeah, it's a bit like being God, isn't it?
It is.
You can
it
just
is.
decide
when it's going well.
Yeah, when it's going well. Yeah, that's true.
I know.
Yeah.
So, Lorna, what about you with Scotland? Because your novel is very evocative, and Scotland plays is a big part of the story. What's your connection, if you have one?
I didn't have a connection other than the fact that I had been sort of obsessed with the Highlands of Scotland for so long and had never managed to make it there. And so it kind of enthralled me, and I really wanted to sort of investigate Scotland's role, because my book is set in the present day and in the war. And I was really intrigued by sort of the Highlands of Scotland being cordoned off while the sort of the army were training, and it was very much there for the secret service, and it was all very, it was like the atmosphere of it in the war and the atmosphere of it now and the beauty of it. And so I really was intrigued not just by its role in the war, but just how it is now, and sort of the history and the heraldry of the castles and these sort of old families, still a bit much like in Britain as well and the rest of Britain, trying to make castles work in a time when, you know, owning a castle doesn't necessarily work that well if you haven't got that much money to look after. Yeah. So it's kind of a mixture of all of that, really.
And I guess as well, the Highlands of Scotland really hasn't changed, physically hasn't really changed in the time span of your novel.
Not really, not where I set it. I found this amazing book in a charity, it's in an antique shop actually. It was written in 1934, and it was a sort of black and white photo book of Scotland, and all the pictures from when I went to research, driving through past the beautiful mountains and the lochs, and just, you know, they really look after their environment, you know, not like some other places where hotels crop up everywhere, and, you know, it really looks as it did then in the countryside, looks now, it's much the same. It's really glorious. You could picture yourself throughout any era, I think, standing on a Scottish mountain. It's beautiful.
I had exactly the opposite thing, that Malta has changed beyond recognition, most of it.
The old town is beautiful in Malta. I was really lucky.
Malta hasn't changed that much because it's a UNESCO. But one of the barracks, the barracks where I went to school is just obliterated. It's a shopping centre.
Really?
A little bit of my school's been built onto the sort of added back onto the side of one of the modern buildings. And one of our old houses is now the local authority planning department, and flats we lived in are just private housing. You know, it's completely different now.
Yeah. So does that feel a bit sad when you go back and it's all unrecognisable?
Well, it's happened so gradually, obviously. You know, how many places do stay the same for nearly 50 years? It's the Highlands of Scotland. Sorry,
that one.
But that is quite unusual, isn't it?
Yes, I would say so. One of the things which really struck me was I've been going back since about 1982, so 12 years between when I left for good, as it were, and the first time I managed to go back. And my dad was still alive then, and he was a surveyor for the army, and he knew a lot about Malta and its infrastructure. And he died quite soon afterwards, unexpectedly. And so I feel very grateful and that I had that 2 weeks with him, and he loaded my mind with knowledge that it hasn't ever completely gone. And because I've gone regularly then over the years, sometimes there's been a gap of several years when finances wouldn't allow. But like last year, I went 4 times. So, you know, you do get used to seeing it happen gradually. But in A Summer on a Sunny Island. St Rita Street, Trig Santa Rita, plays a big part, and it's the centre of the nightlife in Malta now. It's a stepped street, and it's just wall to wall clubs, pubs, gentlemen's clubs, and even during the day it's hopping. And I have a picture of my mum there just before Dad died, so the early 80s, and it was deserted. We used to walk through there as a shortcut to the bus from a Lido we used to go to. And even in the early 80s, it's just deserted with little apartments either side. And it's hard to recognise as the same place. And that's just in 30 years.
Yeah, yeah. Places do evolve, don't they? Generally.
Yeah.
Now we've got some questions. So let me just pick one of those up. Right. Now we've got some questions here. We've got one from Fiona Squire, who asks, how many books have you written which haven't been published? And how long does it take you to write a novel from start to finish? So Lorna, you admitted that you have one.
I have one that will never see the light of day. It was my practice book, book 0, I think you call it.
You finished it. You did finish it.
Finish it. And I think I knew halfway through it wasn't working, but I did keep going, and I did get it critiqued as well. Before I joined the Romantic Novelist Association New Writers Scheme, I did get it privately critiqued, which is one of the best ways to learn how you're going wrong, when a published author just picks your book apart completely. It was very educational, probably better than just reading a how to write book, because it takes your style of writing and your genre and kind of tells you what you're doing wrong in that genre, which I found really helpful. It was really sort of ridiculous mistakes, like there was no reflection after any drama. It was just drama, and every scene was this couple every single time. So it was just a bit sort of, I think reading it, I would never want to read it again now. It'd be too horribly and embarrassing. But it was very much sort of an in-your-face kind of book. And I think at the end, it was at the end, it's done, So I realised that was not going to work. So I put that to one side and focused on other things instead.
When I was writing my first novel, which is now about 18 years ago, I was so despondent. It did actually get published, but it didn't do very well. But I was saying to a friend, oh, it's awful. And this is just the biggest pile of tripe, And he just said to me, whatever happens, you will have written a book.
Yeah, and you got it published, your first one. That's amazing.
Well, at the time, I didn't know it would be. And it kind of really helped me, actually, that sort of someone saying you will have done it. And most people don't actually write a book, do they? Lots of people say they want to, or they have one in them, they think. So that was kind of helpful. I thought, it sort of lightened me up. I sort of thought, yeah, I'll have written a book, and it took the pressure off, actually. I must get this published, it must get amazing reviews, all that stuff that you worry about when you're writing. That kind of clouds the issue, actually. And the other part of that question, Lorna, was how long start to finish, roughly, would you say it takes you now to write a novel?
The Forgotten Village, I wrote a very basic first draft in 4 months. But this was when my little girl was just born, and so she slept a lot during the day. Not a lot at night, but a lot during the day. So I wrote in big bursts then. So that was 4 months, and the one I've just finished, my third book, I think was 6. So I think I'm getting slow. Right. But yeah, so not as long as, I don't need a whole year. I'd love a whole year, but I don't need a whole year. So I can, but then you have to flesh it out afterwards, and you rewrite and you re-edit, and so there's a lot that goes into it after you just sort of finish that last sentence. It's basically going back to the document and starting again.
When I first got my edits back from my first editor, I didn't realise that there was an editing process. I thought you send it in and it's in the shops. I honestly thought that. Got this email saying, here are my notes. And there was pages and pages of notes, things I had to do to make it better.
Yeah.
I was absolutely appalled. I was like, what do you mean it's the first draft? This is it? You know?
I knew before I got my notes that I was going to get them, so that wasn't a shock. But learning about the process when you're going on submission, and editors and agents tell you how it's going to be, or other authors tell you how it's going to be, and that I was much like you, because I'd worked in journalism. I was very used to submitting an article, and I would never see it again until it was laid out on the page, and I just had to proofread it. And so when I got, you know, the thought of getting notes back and then having to edit it myself, it's like, this is my job. This is not my job. Surely a sub-editor will do this. But of course, that's not how it is in publishing. But it's good because it means you get control of your own book a bit more, which is really very different to what I've been used to doing in journalism. So yeah, has its pros and cons.
And you see it improving. I mean, I'd say there's usually 3 rounds of edits, aren't there? So it comes bouncing back to you so many times. You're like, this thing, I can't bear to look at it.
You're sort of done by the end.
but it improves it a million times over, I think, doesn't it? And
it gives you a few weeks or a month either side to kind of get over having seen it that last time, and then you're sort of ready to look at it again with fresh eyes, rather than it just being like bang, bang, bang.
Yes. So Sue, in terms of books that you wrote that weren't published?
Well, I think there's only 2 that absolutely just went in the landfill. There were a couple of others that had some merit, shall we say. So I turned them into, took an 80,000 word book and changed it into a 30,000 word serial. That's about how much merit there was in there. But I didn't publish my books in order. So it was the 8th book I wrote was the first one published. But the first agent I got, not my current agent, my first agent took me on for books 3 and 4. And they then became, well, they were 3rd and 4th I wrote, and they came out as the 3rd and 4th books actually. But then the 9th book had come out as the 2nd book, and then that later came out in paperback as the 5th book. So it's really it's kind of tricky to work it out. And some of those serials look like books because they're on Amazon and they're in the libraries as books, because they're just short books, large print or whatever. So I don't count them. When I say this is my 16th novel, I don't count them. Right. They're little, but they are, I physically have book shapes with those words in them.
Nothing is wasted.
Sorry?
Nothing is wasted.
I try not to. No, absolutely not. And I recycle ideas a little bit with short stories. It's 10 years since that came out. I'll rewrite it, use the same idea. As for how long it takes me to write a book, well, I write to a year, but it's by no means a linear process. So like you said, maybe a first draft might be 4 months. Because in the 6 months that you might think I've got for one book, I'm editing the book before and promoting the one before that. And I could well be planning the one after. So it's I don't know how long you write. I work 50 or 60 hours a week, not including the time I sit in my armchair and do Twitter and stuff.
Yeah. Yes, I think there's all that crossover, isn't there? So you're writing a book, you're just starting one, you're doing the edits on another one, you're maybe talking about another one. I don't know about you, I find it really hard to remember. I've been doing kind of roughly 2 a year for the last few years, since my 3 children went to university. We had to support them all. But, somebody will ask a question about a book and I suddenly think, they'll talk about Roger and I'm like, who was that?
That's happened to me on the radio.
When you can't remember your own book.
And they said, is Kieran based on anybody? And I went, sorry, can you remind me who Kieran is? My mind's gone blank.
No, I'm the same, and I don't know about you two, but I find the book in progress is the only book in my head. Everything else has had to be hoovered out because you're having to come up with so much material for every chapter, aren't you? It's not just the main plot, it's all the little strands, and everyone's got to have a job and, and a description and a backstory in most cases. Yeah. So there isn't really a lot of room for the other books to hang around in there, do you think?
But there's a lot of room for the next book. for me.
Well, that's always going to be the best.
Which is the curse of the shiny new idea, where you're sort of, I'm heading towards maybe the sort of 70,000 word marker of a draft, and I have to get to about 100,000. And I think that's what encourages me to get to the end quick, because I'm like, if I finish this, I can get to the next one, which I don't want to start, but I will think, oh, you know, almost there. I'm nowhere near almost there, but yeah.
Same here. And I find once you hit about 60,000 words, it's like you've gone over the hump.
Yes, the halfway mark. It's done.
You accelerate and you feel your confidence is up, you know. But my editing says, "Oh, you've done that so quickly," you know. Let's just see if there's any other questions. Samantha Smith would like to know: in each of your books, do you include a personal aspect, and does that make it easier to write, like Sue with the Malta connection? Is there always something personal? Lorna, would you say that you have a personal aspect to your writing?
Yes and no. No, because my life is not that dramatic, thank God. And I suppose there are traits of me in my first heroine, which I've tried not to do ever again, mainly that she drinks an awful lot of wine, as was possibly pointed out by my first editor. So I think I just have to sort of, you know, make them believable, but not, you know, too obviously people. But no, I just, everybody's different. Nothing really reflects anything that's happened in my life, really. Just disappear into another world.
I have used things. I don't always want to admit what they are, but I tend to steal things from other people's lives instead. Somebody will. I do mind my memories. For Summer on a Sunny Island, I just remembered about a guy I was at school with, who he was involved in a group of lads who were being naughty teenagers, and they went into a derelict building and vandalised it. And he, for a dare, punched a window out and it slashed his wrist.
Oh my gosh. And
somebody had to drag him out into the high street to a pharmacy to ring the ambulance, sort of pumping arterial blood. And he never got the full use of that hand back. And that, I don't mean to remember these things. It just came into my head one day. And I wonder why he didn't get in trouble with the police. And from there, really, came a lot of that book. Because Zach was the one who helped get the sort of the youngest member of the gang when everybody else ran away, helped get him to safety, and then he got community service for his pains, and it started a chain of events, and just that gave me really all of Zach's character, that he fights for the underdog, and it gets him in trouble. So from that point of view,
that was rooted in a real event of somebody that you knew. I think I'm the same. It's like if a character appears or there's a strand and I'm needing to find something that's going to be believable, it's almost like combing through life, you know, and even people's jobs I've found. I've gone through my Facebook friends and thought, I need a job. I feel like I've used up all the jobs, you know, over the years. And one book, a couple of books ago, I was like, I was so stuck, and I went through all my Facebook friends and saw a friend who was a driving examiner that does the actual tests, and that ended up sparking a whole story, a whole book about a woman who lists her husband's faults, minor and major, and leaves him. And it was all because I saw that my friend is a driver. You know, it's funny how things spark, isn't it? And then run away and become a huge part of the book.
Yeah.
You know. It shows how desperate we are.
I don't know. I call it my plotty head. I rely on it a lot. And when it starts, I get my phone and open the notes app and start making notes.
And it's fun, isn't it? It is. I think when writing's going well, it's enjoyable, and you can see that on the page.
Yeah.
You know, you get that blissful feeling, and you've written a whole page, and it's just poured out of you. And then do you find sometimes you can, you know, hone the same paragraph 25 times and you feel like you want to pull your hair out?
I go back to it then later.
Yeah, I do. Go back later. I move swiftly on to the next thing and then kind of re-edit. I have to get all the words down, or I will do that. I will just sit and stare at one thing over and over again.
Yes.
And I won't get anywhere. And that will be a day wasted for me, because I am very able to do that. So I have to just keep going.
Yeah.
I've got a few more questions have come in. Okay, this is going back to the very beginning for you, Lorna. Lisa Woolley would like to know how you got into writing stories for magazines.
I didn't do magazine stories. I did sort of non-fiction, so articles. So I started as a journalist, and I applied on a graduate trainee scheme. So I was straight out of university, and I applied on a graduate trainee scheme, and I went in on very terrible pay, and and just sort of worked my way up. And they sent me on lots and lots of courses, so they paid for a lot of good things to learn, like how to write news stories and things like that. So that's how I got into magazines. I bought that Guardian book of all the media. I don't think they make it anymore, and I just applied to everything in there back in the days when you couldn't contact people by email. So you had to post your application off, which took a lot of stamps. So yeah, that's how I got into it.
And Sue, your very first short stories for magazines, how did you get those published?
I did it quite an old-fashioned way as well. My first story was accepted on April the 1st, 1996, and I thought maybe it was a trick. But that was the 30th one. I've still got the book, I used to write them all down in, and that was the 30th short story I'd sent out. So I obviously don't give up. But I just used to send them, there were courses you could go on how to write for magazines, and there was a greater, I don't know, how long ago you started doing it, Fiona, but there was a much greater spread of magazines
massive
that did fiction. Me and Bella, and there was, and Woman's Own and Woman and Woman's Realm. There was probably 12 to 20 things you could hit on. And so I just would, type them out in my best typing and send them with a little covering letter saying, here's me stuff, hope you like it, and an envelope for them to send it back in. I used to stand at the top of the stairs when the post came, in the days when you got an early post, like 6 a.m, and see all these brown envelopes and try and see if any of them were thin, which meant that it just had a letter in saying, you can have £65 for this or whatever.
Were you writing novels at the same time you were writing your short stories? You were doing it all together? Wow.
Yeah, I've never stopped writing novels, although when we went through a bit of a financial crisis, when my husband had a career blip, I had to become much more fee aware. So I did anything to do with writing. I judged competitions, I appraised manuscripts, and I did an awful lot of teaching creative writing, both in person and direct learning, which when I began it was called correspondence courses, and I would really put myself out there, and I would write to someone and say, well, this course isn't very good, for £4,500 I'll write you a better one, and they took it. And I think, well, that's and I used to divide my day in two, and I would do teachy things in the morning and writey things in the afternoon.
You've got such a work ethic, and it makes me think, I think there's sometimes a bit of a myth that writing is about waiting for the muse and waiting for this divine inspiration, and weeks go by and it's not happening. But actually, when it's your full-time job and you've got a family to support or yourself to support, a mortgage to pay, it's amazing how actually writer's block doesn't really happen.
That's true.
You don't have time for it. Just
you haven't
write something else.
Yes.
You do. I used to write when my little one was asleep, and so I knew that if I didn't wake her up after 2 hours, she would be a complete nightmare at night time. So I knew I had that 2 hours and I had to write as much as I could write in just 2 hours every single day. And so if you wait for the muse, nothing will happen. So it's like, laptop up, just go, and then time it for 2 hours. So you do.
And it's interesting about writing with young children. I wrote my first book when all my three were under 5 years old. They were all at home. I've got twin boys and a daughter, and it was becoming a mum that propelled me to write fiction. I'd never written a novel before that, and I was 35, I think, at the time. And it was almost a determination to do something for myself, because life was so hectic and so children orientated. I was like, I'm going to write a book. And it was like the worst time. Our house was being renovated, and that house was absolute mayhem, but I was sleep deprived anyway. I looked exhausted. So I kind of sat up at night and wrote as well. It was like a determination to grab, and also I thought it'd be really glamorous, Being an author, I thought, oh, it's going to be really glamorous. I'm going to be going to loads of parties. Of course, it isn't. We know that it's not.
Sitting at home in our gym jams.
Exactly. But
I go to parties. I'll go to the opening of an envelope. I go to people's launches. I go to all the RNA, well, until recently, all the RNA events. And
I thought there'd be even more, Sue. I thought that, I thought publication day you'd be driven around in a limousine and, there'd be
no, that hasn't happened.
We've got a question from Wendy Rigg, who would like to know, back on the sort of productivity sort of issue, roughly how many words do you aim for a day? Do you have a target at all? Sue, what about you?
I would like to say a minimum of 2,000 most days if I am writing a first draft. It doesn't always happen because sometimes you have to break off and research or go to London for a meeting or something, but my first draft is vaguely predicated on that 2,000 words a day. But I prefer to do more because I do overwrite grievously. Mm-hmm. So for every 2,000 I write, I might keep 1,500 words. So I think somehow Lorna was talking to start off with about you just got to get it all out there, and I'm very much like that. Let's get it there and see the story.
Yeah,
and then I'll make it pretty. And for me, making it pretty is cutting out an awful lot. I went and bought Ernest Hemingway's Crapometer at auction, and I wheeled it quite, assiduously. I think I do write very long, convoluted sentences first draft.
And what about you, Lorna, word count wise, or does it vary?
It does vary, but I'm a bit like Sue actually, in that 2,000 seems to be, I feel like I've had a good day if I've done 2,000. Yeah. But if I'm in the middle of something that I know I can see the end of the scene, or I can see the end of the chapter, and maybe halfway into the next chapter, I try to just keep going. And so if on a very rare day, I'll get to 5,000, and that's a very good day. Very good day. And then I'll come away sort of drained and my fingers.
That's right, yeah.
But I feel it will have been worth it. But that's very rare.
Yeah, it is.
Yes. Yeah, 5,000, I think I've hit that a few times, and that is my absolute max. Yeah. I literally stagger away from the computer.
Yeah. Me.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a shall we have a takeaway night.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And a wine.
Yes.
Yeah. No, it does vary. I mean, I think targets are good. I find it's helpful to have something to aim for, and also to accept that sometimes, do you find some days you just aren't that productive, and you like Sue says, you've researched or you've mulled it over, or I think sometimes if you've solved a plot problem, you might think that's a brilliant day because you've solved that. You've come up with a really good idea, but but your book hasn't grown that much, which can be a little bit frustrating.
No, that's very true. I think sometimes to plan a chapter is more productive than to write it for me. I sometimes just write, but other times when I'm thinking, this is beginning to feel a bit purposeless, then I will start writing the chapter in notes. And that can feel more satisfying. I've only got 500 words down, but tomorrow that's going to be 4,000.
Yes, yeah. Kind of in a similar vein, on the sort of the kind of practicalities of writing, Daniel Riding has asked, which I think it is a question that gets asked quite a lot, but it is quite an important one. Do you plot throughout, or do you just dive in, or is it somewhere in between? What about you, Lorna?
Somewhere in between. I did plot my first book, The Forgotten Village, but I then didn't really plot my second book out. I think I tried to write down a synopsis for my agent anyway, and that's usually about a page, and then I tried to condense that into what would look like the blurb on the back of a book. And then I kind of just work from that, and characters are very much in my head, which they probably shouldn't be. They should probably have huge swathes of background information, but I kind of develop them as I go. But I can see the start, the middle and the end, and that's kind of where I write like that. Everybody talks about 3-act structures, and I don't really envisage any of that sort of thing. I just go beginning, middle, end. What do I want to have happened? How do I want to get there? And then I sort of structure it like that. But it is a bit sort of suck it and see. I do have a plan. I do have a plot. I know where everybody needs to be. We just get there in our own way.
Yeah, I'm not dissimilar to that. I probably want to know different things to you. The character biographies are very important. So I don't call myself a plotter or a pantser. Oh, hi, Daniel, by the way, because we were talking on Facebook this morning. I'm not a plotter or a pantser. I call myself a composter, because I have like this heap of material and I just pray that something good will grow out of it, really. But I do start with quite sizable character biographies, and I write by hand for that. For some reason, there's something to do with getting it out of my head and onto the page that needs to go through a pen. And I like to think of my characters as really multifaceted, so I'll look at them from different people's points of view. Like Zach, his relationship with his dad is very important. It's not a good relationship. In fact, Rosa doesn't have a good relationship with her dad either, and both those things are very important. So I'll look at them from their dad's point of view, from their ex's point of view, from their best mate's point of view, whoever's important in the book, and of course from each other's point of view. And I like to know their conflicts. Sometimes it would be nice to know how to solve them before I get to about 90,000 words and feel like bursting into tears. So I have some direction on it. But not, I don't have, if I distilled it into a paragraph, I've heard of other authors doing that and it sounds great, I would forget. And that did happen with last summer's book, A Summer to Remember, which is the hardest book I've ever written. I think it was number 14. And that book just would not go right. But it's the one that won me an award. On the same night that Lorna won an award.
No pain, no gain, Sue.
Yeah, that's right. So, you know, I wrote 2 books last year. One was just went like a dream. The other was a nightmare, but it was the nightmare one that succeeded. So go figure.
And you can't always predict the book that is going to really fly either.
No.
You know, you can write a book, I think, that you're really proud of, and maybe it's slightly quirky and a little bit different. And it sort of does okay, and it goes out and it sells all right, but it doesn't do that well. And I mean, I don't really worry too much about sales, not because I'm blasé, but because I feel that part is out of my control now. And I'm always on the next book, looking forward and trying not to worry. If something absolutely bombed, I'd be quite obviously upset. And I think, oh, my publisher's going to drop me and everything's finished, you know. But sometimes a book, I wrote one about 10 years ago, Mum on the Run, and it's actually a really basic story about a mum who feels a bit dumpy and starts running and meets a guy, and it's quite straightforward. I actually really enjoyed writing it. It was just quite simple and it did really well, but then others which I thought were maybe cleverer didn't, you know. And you can't predict. I think you just put in as much as you can into the book you're writing, don't you? Without thinking, how can I write a bestseller? I mean, I never think that. I'd freeze up and never write another word, you know.
The fear.
Well, I do listen when people say stuff about writing a bestseller. You know, I've been to conferences where an editor will say, we're looking for something with a really high stakes conflict. And I'll think, okay, what's that? And I'll say to the person, what do they mean, you know? And they'll say, well, life and death, something that matters. And oh yeah, no, I can see what, and I will look at my conflicts then and think, well, you know, will this actually bother anybody? Is there enough meat to this conflict? And so I think of it from that point of view. But I was saying to somebody yesterday, when my children were small, outside my mum's flat, one day the little one took the big one's hand and said, let's close our eyes and cross the road and hope there are no cars coming. Which I have to say, that is not how I taught them to cross the road. But it's a bit like publishing. That's a bit the way I write a book.
Yeah.
Is I close my eyes and, you know, cross my fingers and hope that there's no cars coming to knock me down. And I listen when my editor speaks and see what needs to be changed.
And I think when, you know, when you're about to start your next book and it's contracted, so what I'll do is send maybe 3 ideas to my editor. and we'll discuss them. But in my gut, I know which one I can really run with. And it just might be a vague sort of concept. My one that was out this year is called When Life Gives You Lemons. And a lot of it is about the sort of humour around menopause and having a big, discovering there's a big hair sticking out of your face and you forget things and your confidence is all low and night sweats, all that business. I just knew there was loads of humour in that and I really wanted to get it down, and I didn't have a great plot idea at that point. But when you just think, no, I really want to write about this area of being a woman and this life stage, sometimes I think it's more of a feeling about what the book's about rather than the actual plot, I don't know.
I want you to write the one I think that you feel more into.
Yeah.
I hope, and I think that's something my agent always says. Like, if this is the one you want to write, then you have to say, because if this is the one you think you can get through, not easily, but with enthusiasm all the way to the end, much better that than a high concept plot or something like that where you are not invested, you're not that into it, because it will probably show, I guess.
Yes,
I agree completely, and I give my editor a choice of one. I do discuss it, when I go in and see them, maybe about the marketing of one book, I will take the opportunity to kind of wash up the last book and say, how did that do? What could we have done better? And I'll pitch my idea for the next book, but I don't pitch it in such a way that I expect them to tell me that that won't work, come again with another answer. I tell them what I'm thinking of, and they might say, oh, we see a little sensitivity around this, or I wonder about that setting or something. It's not the central cog that they try and interfere with at all. And I've actually had quite a lot of editors in my career. And I'm not just saying this because I'm on Avon's Lit Vest, but they are the most receptive to working with me in that way. And yeah, if you, like Lorna says, if you think that's the right one. The other side though, when I went to, I'm with Blake Friedman now, Juliet at Blake Friedman. And when I first went to her, before she signed me up, she said, so what are you thinking of? And I told her an idea, and she sort of sat there quite impassive, and I went on and gave her another idea and then another idea, thinking, is she going to smile soon or something? And she said, that's the one I'd have most confidence in pitching to a publisher. And so on that occasion I absolutely went with that one, but I've been back and written the other two, so nothing was lost.
Yes, nothing's wasted. I find that initial chat with an editor about the book just before you start writing really helpful. I know I've got a tendency to have too much preamble and not to get into the real guts of the story quick enough. And my editor pointed out the one I'm just about to finish now, and I have it in the back of my head, does X happen soon enough? It's a good little reminder. I can hear my editor actually talking, or I can feel her kind of like hovering over my shoulder. And it's funny, I think sometimes you think you can get away with stuff, and now a few books down the line, I know, I'm like, no, I know what she'll say about that, because I've tried to fudge something, thinking I can get away with it. And really, I think we almost become editors ourselves eventually, don't we? It's like we're editing as we're going along. We know what an editor's going to say. I mean, there's always loads of fresh stuff because it's an objective view, but I think it helps. It's a team effort, isn't it? Really, I think very much.
Definitely. I felt very lucky with my editors so far, and I've only been with Avon. I've never been anywhere else yet. So, it's all just watching what other people say, and they know what they're doing. And that's why I love that it's a team effort, because it's so lonely writing a book anyway, that if you were to do the whole thing on your own, that would be dire. And the lovely input that I've had from my editors, I feel like their names need to be on the front of the book as well, because backstories are developed where I would not have thought of them, and they really put so much work in. It's very lucky actually. That's when you kind of really feel like you're actually having your hand held for a bit, which is a nice feeling.
And it's a sort of process, isn't it? It's like we've said, you submit your first draft, and then you'll usually have to do quite a big meaty edit, and then there's another edit, and then it'll go to the copy editor. And that's important as well, because that's the person, external person, aren't they? Freelance usually, that are always, who'll say, but this character has been pregnant for like 16 months. And you're like, oh no, how did that get through, you know?
Yeah, this dog has not gone out for 12 days now. Nobody's taken this dog anywhere. Oh, no.
I know. As well as my sort of, my kind of weakness seems to be changing people's eye colours throughout the book. I mean, I'm not a great note keeper. I'm quite chaotic, to be honest. I tend to dive in too quickly because I'm really, really impatient, and it feels like moulding a big piece of clay on a potter's wheel, going out of control, down blind alleys. You know, it's quite a chaotic way of working, actually, but it's quite exhilarating when it goes well. We are all different, and I always think the next book I'm going to have the method perfect, you know.
But it works for you now, so don't change it.
Yeah. Laura Parrish has asked a question. She says, the most I've managed to do is submit a small section of a book. Do you have any advice for writers who are struggling with the confidence to throw themselves into that first draft and finish it? Which is a good question, isn't it? It's really scary throwing your book out there in the world, isn't it?
Sorry, I missed the question totally. Was it about submitting the whole book or writing the whole book?
It's having the confidence to finish and submit.
Yeah.
So
just have to do it or it won't get published. It's a bit like who is it? Is it Alison May who says just sit down and write the sodding book, the RNA chair, and that is it. You just have to put your bottom in a chair and you just have to do it. And I think that's the problem about writer's block that people get, is that you can write and then you run out of steam, and that's not a sign to stop. It's a sign to go away and make a cup of tea and have a think about it and then sit down and then try and keep going. And if you can't do it that day, then come back another day and then perfect it, listen to podcasts. That's what I do to perfect my writing. It may be people who aren't in my genre doing a podcast, but it will always be the same sort of advice for how a chapter should be structured, or you know, that kind of thing. Read writing books. And then so my path to publication involved being on the new writers scheme with the RNA, and that was invaluable because Alison May was the one who critiqued my first book, The Forgotten Village, and so I didn't have the guts to just send my book out to agents. I went via the new writers scheme, and that helped hone my craft better. And so if you can, I don't know if the Crime Writers Association do something, if you write crime, but if you can do something like that and you're unpublished, then I would definitely recommend it. And then after that, I was given the confidence to go forward, but I'm not sure I would have done without having that route first, maybe.
Yeah. What about you, Sue, with confidence of actually submission, deciding that, you know, actually having the gumption to send it off?
Well, I think there are two questions. Do you have the gumption to write it? Do you have the gumption to send it out? If you get to a treacly part of your book, so does everyone. Don't start another book, or you'll end up like those students who just do the first year of 12 courses and never actually get their degree, because it's always easier to go back to the beginning and travel in hope than actually take your finals and do the revision and get your essays in on time. And a book's a bit like that. So if you're really stuck, go forward, go to a scene you really want to write, something that's bubbling in your head, write the end, write something that you're prepared to tear up and throw away, but write. When it comes to sending it out, I've got a few tips. For one thing, you can send it to people who will never ever see you and never know you, and you will never know if they say to someone else in the office, gosh, this is a heap of rubbish, which nobody actually says, I shouldn't think. Or you will only know if you do well or you get it back. You don't really find out what anybody's thinking about it. And it's not like you're showing it to a boy you're trying to impress. It's going out there to people who it's their job. This is their job to look at manuscripts and spot something that's worth nurturing. And the other thing is, I think a big tip is to create personal relationships with editors and agents. Either on social media at the moment is follow them and get chatty with them. Don't stalk them. And in real life, when we get real life back again, if you can possibly afford it, go to conferences and to talks and things like that, and find out what people really want. Ask those questions. What would you think of a book on this subject? Asking for a friend, if you like. You know, make use of everything. But we all have been in this situation, or I would imagine. I certainly have. You know, I didn't have anybody beating my door down. I used to let myself go into a funk for 4 days if I got a rejection in a short story. And one day I thought, this just can't go on. I'm just not writing for 4 days every time I get a rejection. So I got myself a new strategy. I would screw the letter up. It's not so easy to do with an email, but in those days it was letters. I would screw the letter up, throw it at the wall, shout a swear word, and go upstairs and start writing again.
Yeah. I think that's a brilliant tip, actually. I think we can get really bogged down as well, especially with that first book, that the first thing you submit. I think you can get, personally, I got to a point with my first book where I thought, it's not great, but it's all right. It's got nice bits in it, and it's actually the best I'm capable of at this present time. This is my absolute, you know, it's not a great work. I don't know if it'll sell, but it's the best it can be. And that was it. I almost sickened myself of it, actually, and sent it off. So that was the stage I got to.
That's when you know it's ready to go, is when you can't look at it without throwing up.
Yeah, that's so true. And it isn't a smooth route either. I mean, I published 4 books with a different publisher, and it was okay, but I was a very early stage, and I didn't understand that you write in a genre and that you're a brand. I was trying all sorts of stuff. My editor was probably tearing her hair out. It didn't really work out very well. And it was only really when I got a different agent and came to Avon that things sort of clicked. It just fell into place. The whole process was happier and not a complete ball of angst, which it had been, you know, in the early days. I found it really hard. It wasn't at all what I expected, actually, the early years of being published. But it was a good lesson in sticking at it, you know, and trying another one and another one. I wrote one novel, which ended up being published in America, but never in the UK. And I couldn't bear to read it again myself. I'm amazed that it actually got out there. You know, so it is a rocky, I think you do need a lot of resilience, but, and, you know, we're all allowed to feel kind of unconfident, aren't we? And I'm sure we all have that, don't we? Bouts of kind of, how am I going to pull this off again? Do you ever feel that, you know? How am I going to do this again? But you do, once you're in it, you've written chapter 1 and you're off again.
Yeah. Well, the deadline is the motivating factor, isn't it? I did once ask for my deadline to be extended by a month, which it was without any problem. But then that left me with 5 months for the next book, not 6. So I've made sure not to do that again. But I sometimes think, okay, well, I'm sending this in, and my editor is now going to earn her salary. Sorry, Phoebe, if you're listening.
And it's amazing. They're like magicians. I had a book I wrote a couple of years ago during quite hard circumstances. My mum had died, and I had to start writing again, and it was really difficult. And my editor did a brilliant rescue job on it, I have to say. Completely changed the timeline, or suggested that I should. And I was like, that's impossible. How can I insert a year into a book? I can't do it. And it worked, and it was fine, and it was kind of seamless by the end of it. But it was a real rescue job, you know. We've got a good question here from Joanne Baird. She says she is finding books a great escape from the outside world just now. I'm really pleased.
Oh, we all.
Yeah,
I know. And she wonders, who are your go-to authors when you want a feel-good read? What about you, Lorna?
I have a list of my go-to authors that doesn't really change as the decades fly by. So I love Kate Morton, and I love Liz Fenwick. Rachel Hoare, and I've recently discovered Laura Jane Williams, who's an Avon author, and her first one was just hilarity. It was brilliant. So yeah, they're good ones to go to. They're good escapist reads. I like an escapist read, but then I write in an escapist genre, so I'm not really a crime thrillers kind of girl. So yeah, no murder and mayhem at this time of year for me. You know, just nice, easy, calm holiday reads. I love a holiday read, even when I'm not on holiday.
I'm much the same. Much the same. I really like Jules Wake, who also writes as Julie Kaplan. Rhoda Baxter, Katie Ford, a lot of the American authors of romantic suspense. I'm really into Toni Anderson at the moment, which does get a bit grim, but I always know that there's going to be a happy ending, and I've got this hot relationship going all through the book that sort of keeps it going. I like some biography and autobiography, particularly if it's Formula One. As soon as a Formula One book comes out, I'm on it, and that is a real, when I know I've got the time to read it, because I'll normally buy a Formula One book as a paperback because of the pretty pictures, so I need to know that I'm not traveling anywhere for a few days, because I've got this great big book to take round with me, and I just sink into it. Christmas particularly.
Yeah, one of my favourites is David Nichols, who wrote One Day and Us, which was my favourite of his, about sort of a difficult relationship of a teenage son and the dad, and they go on a big tour of Europe, and it's the last trip, and it looks like the parents are about to break up, and I just absolutely love it. And I have this thing where I have a book I love sitting near me when I'm working, and it's a bit like I want the vibes to come off the book, or I'll dip into it and read a bit that just lifts me, and I just, not that I'm going to copy the style or even be influenced by the style, I hope. You know, the way you pick up accents of people, like, oh no, am I being influenced? But I just find books that are quite, Nick Hornby I always really liked. I've just read Adults, or I'm just almost finishing Adults by Emma Jane Unsworth, which I love, which is way younger than I write, but it's really quirky and really well written. And like you, Sue, I like non-fiction. I love David Sedaris, who writes essays which are hilarious. Do you find it hard to read when you're writing really hard to deadline yourselves? Can you enjoy other people's books?
Yeah,
I can. I only read at night in bed, so I'm a really slow reader, because by the time I kind of have written or I've been with the kids all day, reading is my escape. But I'm so tired I can do about 5 pages and then I go to sleep. So it takes me forever to get through a book. But I love that. It's my wind down at the end of the night. So even if I've written all day, I can still enjoy other people's books. Or worse, I read it and I love it so much, and I think their writing is leagues above mine, and then I don't enjoy the book because I'm like, oh man, I'll never be like this, and then it gets a bit sad and heart-rending. But other than that, yeah, I do I'm still able to escape.
Yeah, reading's my big pleasure. I read when other people, I hardly watch any telly apart from Formula One and a few documentaries. So when other people are watching telly in the evening, I'm reading. I read over lunch. I have an audiobook going while I'm cooking. Everything to me is reading is the big thing.
Yeah, I know what you mean about the Lorna, with the you can read something that's written so cleverly, and you're like, oh, how will I ever hit that kind of height? But it can be inspiring as well, can't it?
It is, yeah, it is inspiring, definitely.
Because you're getting the pleasure from those words, and you can see the power of the words and what they can do. And you kind of think, well, that'd be great to be able to do that.
Yeah, definitely. One of my big go-to authors, who I forgot to mention, is Lucinda Riley, and I saved all her Seven Sisters series up, and I'm sort of blitzing my way through, and then I read one of hers and think, oh man, there's a reason why Lucinda Riley is Lucinda Riley.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
So good.
Do you read sort of past authors as well? Georgette Heyer and Neville Shute are my big past authors, and everything of theirs, and read it till the print falls off. And now I'm listening to them as audiobooks. Yeah. It's the same books that I've been reading all these years, but I'm enjoying them again as audiobooks.
Yeah. Rosamund Pilcher, she's one that I'll go back to. And Mary Wesley, but I think that tapped into my love of the war more than
Yeah.
anything else as well, but that's sort of romanticism. But yeah, but I don't have that much time to read, so I try not to keep rereading things that I have already read, because there are so many books being published every day that I feel like this tower is growing and I'm not getting through it. So I kept saying to myself, I'm going to go back and read the Brontes this year, and I'm like, no, but look at all the new ones that are coming out. I don't have time to read the Brontes. It's like a challenge.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I do reread a bit, but not as much as I'd like to, I suppose.
Yes. Now, I noticed a question earlier, and I'm not sure who asked it, but somebody has asked us if we can recommend any guides to writing, that if any, do you think there are any use, and if so, are there any that you think are kind of worth recommending and that are helpful?
Okay, it's not a guide to writing, but I don't know, is it going to reflect? I can't tell if this is reflecting.
I can see that.
That's okay.
It's the Emotion Thesaurus.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically sort of, so it's not a writing guide, but it's things like, you know, is this reflecting back, or is it just me that sees it as a mirror? Okay, fine. Yeah. I'm just seeing it as a mirror. Rage, you know, physical signals, what people will go through. So it's basically it's a book about show, don't tell, basically. So I found that really, really good. And this is the only writing guide that sits up in my office. The rest are all downstairs on my bookshelves. But I've read almost everything, I think, writing guides that have been published over recent years. And I think nothing can teach you your own style. But saying that, everybody raves about Stephen King's book on writing, and I have downloaded it.
That is good.
Is it? I haven't.
That's the one I was going to say. It's absolutely brilliant. Even if you don't really go for his style of fiction, it's fascinating. It's a memoir as well, and it sort of ties in. It's totally brilliant. That's my favourite. And in the early days, I loved Natalie Goldberg, who wrote Writing Down the Bones, which I must have read 30 years ago.
I haven't read it, I've heard of it.
It's all a bit Zen Buddhism-y.
Excuse me.
Isn't really me, but she lives in New Mexico. It's all quite kind of like, it's hard to describe. A lot about her Zen practice and things, but there's a lot of kind of very basic writing exercises. I was quite obsessed by her 30 years ago, I'd say that was. She's written loads. She wrote one called Wild Mind, which is really good as well. I don't think there's the book that can write the novel for you, but it's kind of educating yourself, isn't it? It's
which I think is important.
Yeah, like Lorna, you know, you're saying about podcasts, and you kind of, and going to author Q&As, going to book events, I've always find really, really inspiring.
Yeah.
Someone like Marianne Keyes talking about her, you know, writing, I find brilliant, because I want to know what it's like for her and to see what she's like as a person, you know. So I think anything you can do like that. And it can wake you up and refresh you a bit, can't it, to get away from the keyboard for a bit.
Yeah, definitely. And if you can't get to things, so my go-to is podcasts. I listen to the Bestseller Experiment, and they have loads of best-selling authors on, like Joanne Harris. Oh gosh, you name them, they've been on. I think they've been going for a couple of years, and it's so refreshing to hear how they got started, all the false starts they've had, and you know how they write or how they don't write. So you know if you're having a bad day, they're having bad days as well. It does encourage you. It's really encouraging. It's really inspiring as well. I kind of listen to them when I'm doing the dishwasher or when I'm walking the dog, and then I come back and I'm like, right, must write. It kind of bolsters you back up again. They're very good.
What is that podcast called, Lorna? That sounds brilliant.
Bestseller Experiment.
The what, sorry?
Bestseller Experiment. Right.
That sounds brilliant.
Yeah, I do. I thoroughly recommend that. It's very good.
Now, I've got another question.
Can I just say I've written a writing guide?
You have?
Yeah.
We must read it.
Say that.
We must read it.
It's quite old now. It's called Love Writing, and it's about writing romantic fiction. But it is about 10 years old now, so all the ebook part will be probably quite dated, but the how to get them together, how to keep them apart, you know, how to have kind of a relationship with your hero and stuff like this is all in there.
Perfect.
I'm just looking for, we've got some other questions here.
I can see Daniel's just said he has my book. Way to go, Daniel. Good man. Thank you.
We've got Elaine Fernley.
Hi, Elaine.
Who says, your books all strike different chords with me and affect me in different ways. It must be difficult to create your worlds in such a competitive field as fiction. And we've kind of touched on this a bit. Do you ever have self-doubt, and how do you combat it?
Yes. How do I combat it? Not sure.
Self-doubt's part of it, actually.
Yeah.
I just think it's part of the state of being a writer. I don't know any writer who sits and writes with complete confidence and knows where they're going and is confident that their editor's going to love it and it's going to sell, and
no, that's just it. You just have to take rough with the smooth, I think.
And push it away, actually, and also accept that it's quite normal. Do you think so?
Yeah, I do. Push the negativity away. I'm a big one. It's the same doing public speaking or even doing something like this. I just pretend I'm someone who can do it. Works.
The first ever event I did, I was so frightened to stand up and read from my book. I had a neck rash that went right up here, when you get that blotchy thing. And I was literally, my legs were shaking. It was like doing a music exam. I remember I did a saxophone exam once and I was actually shaking. I thought I was going to drop my saxophone, and it was like that. But things get easier with practice, don't they?
Yeah, they do. I used to hate doing live things. I still kind of hate doing live things. Yeah. And so podcasts, when I'm recording podcasts and things, that's lovely because I know they can edit me. Things like this, I'm like, oh dear, you can't edit me.
I like doing live things because I feel like people are listening. And with my family and my friends, I feel like they're not listening. And I think, well, they've even paid to listen and they clap at the end. What can possibly go wrong here?
Oh, I love it.
Have you ever asked your partners or people very close to you to critique your books?
Not critique, but I do get my other half to read it when it's proofreading stage, which there's an argument that's probably too late in the day to do it, because if he spots anything glaring, it's a little bit too late. But I think he's an unpaid pair of hands. He can proofread. He does, yeah. Well, if he doesn't enjoy it, he lies to me and tells me he does. Yeah.
No, my husband doesn't read my stuff at all. But I have other beta readers who I've got one who's been my beta reader since about the year 2000, I think, and that's Mark West. And then sometimes I ask people, like this time, the book that comes out later in the year, A Christmas Wish, is partly set in Sweden. And my friend who, Christina Courtney, who writes the dual timeline stuff, she took me to Sweden. She's British and Swedish. And we went and stayed with her mum. And so she's reading it for me to point out inaccuracies and,
It can be helpful, definitely. But I sometimes think the person closest to you is not. I tried it once and it didn't work out well, asking my husband to read something because he was just moving commas around, and I just, for God's sake, just give it back, And it reminded me of like trying to teach your other half to drive. It was a bit like, it's too emotional, too close.
Yes, I would agree.
Okay, well, I think we've actually run over time a little bit. I hope that's all right.
Yeah, that's fine.
So
wine's still in the fridge.
It's been really nice talking to you.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Really,
thank you for typing questions, everybody.
Yeah,
yes, thank you so much.
Thank you for Fiona for sharing it, and thank you everybody who sent in questions and just who listened. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot for listening. And if you're writing, good luck with that, and stay well and safe. Okay.
Yeah,
bye everybody.